Investigations into parents of transgender children who've received gender-affirming treatment has sent the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services into crisis. In a recent brief, 16 former and current employees revealed that a mass exodus of staffers sparked by the controversial policy could bring the department to the brink of collapse. Back in June, a judge in Texas temporarily blocked such investigations on the grounds the policy will cause, quote, immediate and irreparable injury to families.
Over in Florida, where Republican Governor Ron DeSantis has vehemently opposed gender-affirming procedures for children, some hospitals have already stopped treating trans youth. They've canceled pending surgeries and chosen not to take on new patients looking for treatment for gender dysphoria. In response, the California State Assembly passed a bill Monday that seeks to provide refuge for trans teens and their parents. State Senator Scott Wiener, who introduced the bill, said in a statement, California must stand with LGBTQ kids and their families, especially when they're under attack across the country. Parents should never be separated from their kids or criminalized for simply allowing them to be who they are. Joining us now to discuss this culture battle is our rising panel. Max Alvarez is editor-in-chief of The Real News, and Amy Tarkanian is Republican strategist and former chairwoman of the Nevada GOP. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Amy, I'll start with you. You know, there's been a lot, especially in the last few days, there's been a lot from Twitter, from people like Matt Walsh, other conservatives. There's been a lot of criticism directed at several children's hospitals. There's been a debate over how young the so-called gender-affirming hysterectomies are being performed. With that, you know, the Libs of TikTok account got two callers at the hospital to say that actually they do provide them for people much younger than 16, and then the hospital put out a statement saying no, that's not true, and I don't know who necessarily to believe. The Washington Post thinks they know who to believe, but I'm not sure it's that clear. How do you feel about the way conservatives are approaching this issue? Because I think there is a lot of concern that some of this stuff is happening at far too young an age. And then there's also kind of a lot of just craziness about this that's maybe going too far. But, you know, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, one of my dearest friends is actually trans, but she did not, switch over until she was an adult. And so we've had this conversation numerous times, and we both agree that as a minor and definitely somebody who is not, fully going through puberty, I don't agree that they should be making these major changes. I don't agree also, though, that we should be separating these families, because if this is still acceptable by law to have these families choose to have their children go through these major changes, then I think we need to keep the families together. There's no need to send Department of Family and Social Services. They're not doing anything, with ill intent. They're just trying to take care of their child. But I do think that, leaning more towards like what Governor DeSantis is suggesting of psychiatric or psychological help until the child is not a minor and has gone through puberty.
Yeah, this is what's so frustrating about this conversation, because that type of psychological support is a part of gender-affirming care, the likes of which is now being criminalized in the state. So, gender-affirming care encompasses at least 4 categories of care, 2 of which are entirely reversible, non-permanent, 1 of which is partially reversible, that's hormone therapy, and 1, the gender-affirming surgeries, which get the bulk of the attention here, which is obviously the more difficult to reverse aspect of it. But social affirmation, allowing a child to identify as the gender that they identify as, letting them cut their hair, grow their hair, wear the clothes that feel appropriate to them, and puberty blockers are a level of care that is often erased from this conversation, and yet is being stigmatized under these laws. Max, I wonder what you make of this.
Well, people can take or leave my opinion on this for whatever it's worth. And frankly, I think a lot of it is not like my place to say. I'm a cis man here, right? And, I'm just a guy who interviews workers for a living. But, I also do have a PhD in history, and as a historian, right? I can see where all of this is headed, right? I know what happens to societies that convince themselves that certain outgroup minorities are the ultimate evil that need to be eradicated. And I mean, Jesus, we're I say, like, where I can see where this is headed. In a lot of ways, we're already there. I think we kind of paved over the reality in the intro there, but like, there was a bomb threat called into Boston's Children's Hospital because of this crap. And then one day after, Fox News was directing people at another hospital in Chicago, right? Teachers are being run out of the profession at a moment when we're experiencing a nationwide, quote unquote, teacher shortage, right? And at that point, frankly, I don't think there's a debate to be had. I'm not interested, and I know I'm going to disappoint a lot of people here, and I'm going to get a lot of people angry at me because they want, us to sort of debate, the nature of gender affirming care, whether or not trans people have a right to exist. Frankly, when we've reached the point that we've reached right now, I don't see a debate to be had. I see a side that needs to be picked. And I think every single person who is watching this needs to answer for themselves. Are you going to sit back and let this happen? Or are you going to be your brother's keeper? And are you going to stand with your fellow workers, your neighbors who are currently under attack? That is frankly where I think we are at this at the point that we're at this country. And I think it's really scary and sad, but I'm done, like, doing this sort of back and forth debate. I see people under attack. I see working people under attack. I see kids who are future members of the labor movement under attack. And I, as a cis, dude, want to help and defend them however I can. That's kind of where I am right now. I'm sorry if that disappoints people.
Well, hardly. Amy, I wonder what you say to that, because you say, you have a trans friend, you don't necessarily agree on a personal level to the extent that any of our personal opinions really matter here. I take Max's point there. But on a personal level, with perhaps minors engaging in some of the more permanent kinds of surgery, but at the end of the day, you object to the idea of mobilizing state resources to break up families and make certain kinds of legal behaviors criminal in this context. What do you make of the broader choice by so many conservatives to kind of front load this issue and make what is a pretty discreet conversation that's happening relatively rarely in independent families across the country into this national polarizing issue that is really motivating people in school boards and in more significant elections across the country?
Well, I think the concern is the major push that's been going on with the youth. I have a very close friend whose daughter now goes by they, them. And her reasoning is, when she sees mom and dad fight at home, she thinks that if she tries to change herself, and she's actually said this, that maybe if she goes and dates someone of the same gender or someone who is also, considering a different gender, that maybe her life will be different as she's growing up. She's only 12. So, they've allowed her to cut her hair, color her hair, wear whatever she wants, but they're going to hold out on actually making changes to her body that she may regret later on in life. And, I was actually at a tennis tournament for one of my daughters in California not too long ago. And they didn't just have the American flag on the flagpole, but they had the LGBTQ flag. Why are we pushing this in elementary schools? That's where I think the major concern is. I'm not concerned about a person wanting to make that choice. I would just hope that they would make that choice maybe when they're 18 or older as an adult, once they've gone through puberty, so that way there's no regrets.
Or at whatever age. So look, I largely agree with what you said, Amy. And I don't think most people, look, it's not my business, right? Whatever families and doctors and teens of an appropriate age decide, it doesn't really concern me. Like you, I think it'd be crazy and actually backfire against conservatives to bring in like child services. Like, what if they're going to start, child services could start investigating families for being too religious or something like that. It's like, we don't want to second guess families or give the government the authority to second guess families' choices. That would backfire spectacularly against conservatives. But what happens, like you said, what happens in the schools, what's taught in schools is a matter of public policy far more than, at whatever age teenagers can consent to sex and marriage and other responsibilities, I think they can obviously consent to surgery. But what is mobilizing people, the school boards and all that, is when they see teachers talking about, the videos of teachers talking about concepts they're introducing to young kids in the classroom relating to gender and sexuality, and they don't want that.
But Robbie,
they don't want that.
That's a little bit different than what Amy said. Correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but you made reference to an LGBT flag flown at a sports event as some.
No, it's actually on the school flag pole. So
okay, on a school flag pole, yeah, I completely concede that point. I think I'm just not as scandalized by it. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is we see prisoner of war flags flying at school events and on public property, and Caribbean pride flags and Italian Day flags.
Right, but that's not at the school, and you're not at school to talk about who you're attracted to or what gender that you would prefer. You're at school to learn math, reading, science, and arithmetic. Once it's time to do, sex ed at the appropriate age, and usually, that starts in junior high, but maybe in 4th and 5th grade, is when you start talking about, okay, your bodies are going to change. Here's some deodorant. It's not, what gender would you like to be and would you like to wear a binder? It gets to be a little
Amy, was that the conversation that was being had? I'm just trying to focus on what you brought up, this idea that an LGBT flag on a sports field at school or wherever it was at school is in and of itself an issue. And I think that part of what is frustrating to some folks on the left is that even the most de minimis, there's an unwillingness, I think, to engage in certain arguments about what's going on at the most extreme end of, transition surgeries, because some of the folks that are engaged in the conversation also have an issue with what a lot of people consider to be not that big a deal, which is just an LGBTQ flag. I had lots of flags at my school.
And what you accept about what if they're praying during the game?
You're allowed to. I mean, that's exactly the point.
Actually, you're not allowed to pray anymore on campus. They used to have that, but they don't do that anymore. However, I know the LGBTQ flag is probably just to show, hey, everyone is welcome here on campus, and I get that. But then why not just keep the American flag? So then that way it completely stays out of any type of conversation at all.
Max, we want to give you a chance to respond.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick. I appreciate all the points, but again, I think there's we need to look at the reality that's actually in front of us. If we say that prayer doesn't happen at schools anymore, I challenge anyone to go to any high school football practice. We did that all the time. We did it before every single game. I know people who still do it, right? It happens all the time. So let's pump the brakes on that. And also, I would just say from a labor perspective, having talked to, a lot of teachers over the course of my life, knowing a lot of teachers over the course of my life, what we're really talking about is not, teachers indoctrinating students with quote unquote gender ideology. On a day-to-day level, the way that this manifests is, are teachers allowed to, essentially make their students feel welcome in the classroom, right? That's really what the issue is. Are there going to be students there sitting worrying about, being themselves because they might get beat up, they might get vilified, they might be not recognized for the people who they are? I can say as a person of color that I've experienced that in a classroom, and it really hurts my ability to learn. So that's what I see when we're talking about whether or not, we can even acknowledge the existence of trans people or students who may not, feel comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. But again, that's not really my place to say. What I will say, though, going back to where we started at this, because we started talking about Texas, and this is a point I want to leave people with, because I think that the Texas example is a depressingly perfect example of how pointless, vicious, and self-destructed this feverish war on queer and trans people is. From hurricanes and droughts to floods and heat waves, Texas is getting absolutely pummeled by climate change. The grid is failing, leaving people stranded without heat in the winter, without air conditioning in the summer. Inflation continues to beat the living hell out of working people. There's an affordable housing crisis across the state. And hedge funds are buying up every available house, and yet the Texas minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. Out of 50 states, Texas is 13th in childhood poverty. And as you mentioned at the beginning, Bree, the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services is hemorrhaging staff, and the biggest loss is coming in child services, which means that the people who are entrusted at an already overburdened state agency, the people who are entrusted to protect children, including foster children, many of whom I have in my own family, they are not able to do their jobs because they're either being told to focus on this, or they're quitting because they refuse to participate in this witch hunt of trans kids and their parents, right? So we are just destroying all the basic things that working people need to, instigate this witch hunt. It's destroying all of us. It's really hurting people. And I think that people need to pick a side. The time for debate is over. We need to stand up for one another, stop this. Being a parent does not somehow magically give you the right to hurt other people. Yes, we should have a conversation about how to best handle this as a society, but the way that we're handling it now is not that.
Well,
so
Max and
if I could, obviously I don't agree with the Texas law. However, and I also don't agree with the fact that trans people should not exist. They should exist. It's just the main concern I think that most conservatives at least have, at least ones that I know, is the fact that it's being pushed on minors, and it will be irreparable if they want to make that change in the future.
Well, Amy and Max, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And more Rising right after this.